Late autumn pressed its cold palm over the Montana territory, flattening the prairie grass into dull ribbons of gold and ash. The Callahan Ranch stood alone against a copper sky, its fences creaking like old bones, its barn doors groaning with every restless gust. Inside that weather-beaten house lived a man the town no longer tried to understand. Rhett Callahan had once been known for his laughter. Now he was known for his silence. At 34, he carried himself like a man carved from cedar and stone, broad-shouldered, slow-moving, deliberate. A pale scar traced the edge of his jaw, but it was not the mark people feared. It was his eyes. They were steady, gray, and distant, as though fixed on something buried far beyond the horizon. Men trusted him with cattle and contracts. Women did not bother with him at all. 3 years earlier, fever had swept through the valley like a thief in the dark. It had taken livestock, children, and finally the woman Rhett had planned to marry. He had held her hand as her breath thinned into nothing. By spring, he had built 2 things, a larger cattle operation and a wall around his heart. In the saloon, when talk turned sentimental, he would say in a voice as dry as winter grass, "Love is a gamble no man wins." The word spread. They hardened into reputation. He worked longer than any of his ranch hands, slept less, and spoke only when necessary. The ranch thrived under discipline and distance. He paid fair wages, demanded precision, and avoided every dance, picnic, or church gathering that hinted at joy. To feel less was, in his mind, to survive more. When the letter arrived from Kansas, he almost burned it unopened. It informed him that a young woman named Lila Mae Whitaker had lost her father and was seeking temporary work. She had experience keeping ledgers and tending homes. The town pastor, who had known her family, vouched for her character and resilience. Rhett read the letter twice, jaw tightening. He needed help with accounts, cattle prices had shifted, and expansion required accuracy. Still, he disliked disruption. She arrived on a brittle afternoon, stepping down from the stagecoach with a small trunk and a posture too steady for someone newly orphaned. Lila Mae Whitaker was not fragile, though grief lingered in the careful way she breathed. At 26, she possessed a quiet composure sharpened by responsibility. Her dark hair was braided simply, her dress plain but neatly mended. She surveyed the ranch not with awe, but assessment. Rhett met her at the gate. He did not tip his hat. "You won't find romance here," he said, voice even. "I didn't come looking for it," she replied. The exchange was brief, but something in her tone, unapologetic, grounded, unsettled him. Most newcomers either feared him or flattered him. She did neither. From the first morning, Lila altered the rhythm of the house without asking permission. She rose before dawn, brewed coffee strong enough to anchor the day, and organized the kitchen with economical precision. She requested access to the account books and spent hours reviewing numbers that Rhett had memorized but never properly systemized. When she presented him with a cleaner ledger, annotated and balanced, she did so without ceremony. "You were losing 3% on transport," she explained calmly. "It won't happen again." He studied her longer than the figures. Days passed in purposeful silence. She learned the names of ranch hands, asked practical questions about feed and weather patterns, and mended a broken shutter without waiting for instruction. Rhett noticed everything while pretending not to. Her presence did not flutter, it steadied. Yet steadiness was dangerous. It invited reliance. One evening, wind battered the house so fiercely that dust seeped through the window seams. Rhett sat alone at the table, a small wooden box open before him. Inside lay a faded ribbon and a photograph softened by handling. He did not hear Lila approach until she paused at the doorway. She did not ask what he held. She did not offer comfort shaped like pity. Instead, she crossed the room, lifted a wool blanket from the chair, and placed it across his shoulders with deliberate gentleness. Her fingers brushed his collar, brief, unassuming, human. The contact startled him more than a shout would have. He straightened, box snapping shut. "You don't need to concern yourself with my past." "I'm not," she answered. "I'm concerned with the draft." It was an honest deflection, and it disarmed him. She returned to the kitchen, leaving him with warmth he had not invited. At supper the following night, conversation drifted to a wedding planned in town. A ranch hand joked about marriage being the only reason to survive winter. The room chuckled. Rhett's fork stilled. "Love doesn't save anyone," he said, gaze fixed on the table. "It leaves. Or it dies. And when it does, it takes the better part of you with it." Silence pressed in. Lila set down her cup carefully. "Maybe love doesn't leave," she said. "Maybe fear does." He looked up then, truly looked at her, and saw no mockery, only conviction born from her own loss. Something tightened in his chest, an old ache threatening to awaken. He rose abruptly and stepped into the cold night air. From the doorway, Lila watched him stand beneath the vast, indifferent sky. She did not chase him. She understood distance, she had lived inside it since burying her father. But as wind tugged at her braid, she recognized the shape of his loneliness. Rhett believed he had buried his heart alongside a grave on a frozen hill. He did not yet understand that grief is not burial. It is a door left locked. And Lila Mae Whitaker had just found the handle. Winter arrived without ceremony, sealing the prairie beneath iron skies and hardening the earth into something unyielding. Snow gathered along the fence lines like quiet witnesses, and the Callahan Ranch moved with the careful efficiency of a place determined to endure. Inside the house, the air carried a different tension, thinner, charged, as though something unspoken pressed against the walls. Rhett Callahan had mastered distance, but distance grew complicated in close quarters. Lila Mae Whitaker did not challenge him directly, she altered the ground beneath him instead. She streamlined supply orders, negotiated better grain prices through precise letters, and corrected a long-standing discrepancy in cattle weights that had quietly cost him profit. Each improvement was delivered without triumph. She did not seek his praise. She sought order. He began to rely on her mind before he admitted he noticed her presence. In the mornings, she read figures aloud while he shaved by the wash basin, her voice steady as a metronome. In the evenings, she asked deliberate questions about expansion, why he refused to purchase the adjacent pasture, why he paid widowers above market wage, why he never rode into town on Sundays. Her curiosity was not idle, it was surgical. She was mapping the outline of the man who insisted he had nothing left to offer. "You run this ranch like a fortress," she observed one night, closing the ledger. "It survives that way," he replied. "Fortresses survive," she said quietly. "They don't live." The remark lingered long after she left the room. Days later, a young ranch hand named Thomas was thrown from a skittish mare near the north pasture. By the time Rhett reached him, the boy's shoulder hung at an unnatural angle, pain bleaching his face. Snow began to fall in sharp, blinding sheets. Rhett's voice sharpened into command, but beneath it trembled something older, memory of holding a body he could not save. Lila arrived breathless yet composed. She knelt in the snow without hesitation, assessing the injury with clear, practical focus. "It's dislocated," she said. "We can set it here." Rhett hesitated. He hated risk. He hated helplessness more. "Hold him steady," she instructed. There was no room for pride in her tone. Only urgency. Together they worked, her hands precise, his strength controlled. Thomas cried out once, then sagged in relief as the joint settled back into place. Lila fashioned a sling from her shawl and issued calm directives for rest and broth. The storm thickened, but the crisis passed. Only when the others led Thomas toward the bunkhouse did Rhett realize his own hands were shaking. He stood apart from the activity, breath visible in the freezing air, pulse unsteady with the echo of old fear. Lila approached quietly, snow clinging to her lashes. "You did what needed doing," she said. He flexed his fingers as if they belonged to someone else. "I nearly lost him. But you didn't." Her voice did not rise, it anchored. Before he could retreat into stoicism, she reached for him. Her gloved hand closed around his bare one, firm and deliberate. The contact was not romantic. It was grounding. Still, the world shifted. Her touch was warm despite the cold, steady despite the wind. It traveled through him like thaw through frozen earth, loosening something he had sealed for years. Memory flared, another hand in his, fragile and fading, but this time the memory did not hollow him. It collided with the present, where breath still steamed and life still demanded courage. He could have pulled away. He did not. For a suspended moment, they stood tethered by nothing more than shared heat. Snow gathered on their shoulders. The ranch receded. There was only the fact of her hand in his and the undeniable truth that he was still capable of feeling it. She released him first. Inside the house later, silence pressed close. Rhett poured 2 cups of coffee without asking and set one before her. The gesture was small, almost reluctant, but it acknowledged the shift neither dared name. "You don't have to carry every loss forward," she said, eyes steady on the steam rising between them. "Loss doesn't ask permission," he answered. "No," she agreed. "But fear does." The word struck deeper now. Before he could respond, a knock rattled the front door. Gideon Mercer entered without waiting, bringing with him the scent of expensive tobacco and calculated ambition. The town banker's coat was immaculate despite the storm, his smile thin as wire. "Callahan," he drawled. "Still refusing sensible offers?" Rhett's jaw tightened. Mercer had long coveted a portion of the ranchland to extend rail access. Rhett had refused every proposal, unwilling to fracture the land that held his memories. Mercer's gaze slid toward Lila. "I hear your accounts have improved," he said smoothly. "Influence can be persuasive." The implication hung sharp and deliberate. "She works for me," Rhett replied evenly. "For now," Mercer said. "Winter makes men reconsider attachments." When the banker finally departed, the house felt smaller. "You don't need to defend me," Lila said, though her shoulders were squared. "I wasn't defending you," Rhett answered. "I was defending what's mine." The distinction cut them both. She met his eyes, hurt flickering before resolve replaced it. "I am not a transaction, Mr. Callahan." He knew that. Yet fear translated poorly into tenderness. That night, as wind scraped against the shutters, he lay awake aware of 2 truths colliding: Mercer would not relent, and neither would the feeling awakened by a single, steady touch. Love, he had once claimed, destroyed men. But what unsettled him now was not destruction. It was the possibility of hope. Morning broke beneath a sky the color of tarnished steel, and the ranch felt altered, as if the land itself sensed a fracture running through its foundation. Rhett Callahan stood at the corral fence, watching frost melt into the dirt, aware that something inside him had begun to thaw as well. The thaw frightened him more than any storm. Inside the house, Lila Mae Whitaker packed her trunk with deliberate care. Each folded dress, each ledger neatly tied with ribbon, marked a decision she had reached in silence. Gideon Mercer's insinuations had not wounded her pride, Rhett's distinction had. She would not remain where her presence could be mistaken for leverage. When Rhett entered and saw the open trunk, the air shifted. "You're leaving," he said, though the evidence lay plainly before him. "I won't be used to threaten your land," she replied evenly. "Or mistaken for something you own." His first instinct was defense. Ownership was not what he had meant. Fear had spoken faster than truth. Yet the words lodged in his throat, heavy with years of practiced restraint. "You're not a transaction," he managed at last. "But I am not protected either," she said. "Not from him. Not from you." The accusation was not cruel, it was precise. He had defended acreage more fiercely than he had defended her dignity. Before he could answer, the distant crack of a rifle shattered the morning stillness. Horses startled in their stalls. A ranch hand shouted from the yard. Rhett moved first, instincts sharpened by danger, but this time he did not move alone. Lila followed, refusing the safety of retreat. Across the pasture, Mercer's men had ridden through the outer fence, claiming a boundary dispute as justification. The banker himself sat mounted near the gate, gloved hands resting comfortably on the saddle horn, expression composed as if orchestrating an inevitable correction. "You've refused reasonable offers," Mercer called. "Winter thins resources. I'm here to prevent unnecessary loss." Rhett stepped forward, boots crunching over frozen ground. "You're trespassing." "On contested land," Mercer replied smoothly. "Unless you've reconsidered." The conflict was no longer veiled. It was iron and breath in the open air. Lila moved to Rhett's side, her presence steady rather than dramatic. "The deeds are clear," she said, voice carrying across the field. "You've no legal standing." Mercer's gaze cooled. Legal standing bends when finances do. The implication was unmistakable. If Rhett refused, Mercer would strangle the ranch through credit and supply. For years, Rhett would have responded with silence or violence. Today he felt something else rising, an unwillingness to let fear dictate the terms of his life again. He had buried love once to survive loss. He would not bury it now to survive intimidation. "You want the land," Rhett said, stepping closer to Mercer's horse. "You think I hold it because I'm stubborn. You're wrong." Mercer's brow arched slightly. "Then why?" Rhett glanced at Lila, standing unflinching despite the rifles aimed loosely in their direction. He saw not vulnerability but partnership, not possession but choice. The realization struck clean and undeniable. "I hold it," he said steadily, "because it's where I decide who I am." The statement was not for Mercer. It was for himself. Mercer signaled subtly to his men, a pressure tactic meant to provoke reaction. One rider nudged his horse forward, boot crushing a boundary marker into the mud. The insult was deliberate. Rhett felt the old instinct surge, force, dominance, finality. Instead, he reached back without looking and found Lila's hand. This time he took it intentionally, not in shock, not in fear, but in declaration. "She stays," he said, voice resonant and unwavering. "The land stays. And you can test that claim in court, not with guns." The ranch hands, who had lingered uncertainly, straightened at his tone. Thomas stepped forward despite his injured shoulder. Loyalty shifted the balance more powerfully than threat. Mercer assessed the field and calculated risk. He thrived on isolation and doubt, he did not thrive on unity. After a taut moment that seemed to stretch across the entire winter, he reined his horse back. "This isn't finished," he warned. "No," Rhett agreed calmly. "It's begun." The riders withdrew, leaving churned earth and the echo of conflict behind. Silence settled, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt earned. Rhett turned to Lila fully now. The ranch hands dispersed discreetly, understanding that something more consequential than land had just been decided. "I was wrong," he said, voice stripped of armor. "Not about love dying. About me letting it." She searched his face, measuring sincerity against habit. "I don't need you to save me," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I need to choose you." The distinction changed everything. Wind moved through the pasture, less hostile now, carrying the scent of thawing soil. Rhett removed his glove and lifted her hand to his lips, not in ownership but in promise. The gesture was simple, yet it reverberated with the weight of a man who had finally stepped out from behind his grief. "I don't believe in living half a life," he said. "Not anymore." For a heartbeat she hesitated, testing whether this resolve would fade with the next fear. Then she closed the distance herself, pressing her forehead to his, breath mingling in the cold air. "This is not a fortress," she murmured. "It's a beginning." In the quiet that followed, the ranch did not feel like a battleground or a tomb. It felt like open ground, uncertain, contested, alive. And for the first time since he had stood beside a frozen grave, Rhett Callahan chose to stand beside love instead.